Hey, good evening, Hope Covenant Church. Great to see you all tonight. Thank you so much for joining us for this Stump the Pastors. Man, we've got that like legit title now, banner up in the corner.
It does look good. It does look good. We have one person joining us, and they didn't even join before the end of the countdown. Phil, this is a really sad day for Stump the Pastors. Really sad day.
Because only one?
Well, I feel like our people are they're not joining as quickly as they have in the past.
Oh yeah, that's true. I just broke my pop filter.
Oh, you know what? I don't even use the windscreen. Yeah. I don't even use the windscreen, but that's because I have this soft.
That helps. I think this screws back in here.
Okay.
Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah. Just while I'm talking, just don't listen to me and fiddle with that.
Yeah, that's right. Well, guys, it is awesome to have you here. So maybe you're not watching live, but if you are watching live, or if you're not watching live, so this actually just applies to everybody. Please do feel free to drop questions that you have down in the chat, because we have some questions that came in ahead of time, and we are happy to engage those. But it's also really fun if you drop them in the chat while we're going, because then we have to just jump into it without any thought beforehand, which is kind of fun.
I think that the best questions are the ones that are live.
Yeah.
Because then I know that the people are there who want to know the answer to the question.
That's right.
Like we could just be rambling on about something that nobody that's on the live feed cares about.
No one cares.
But when you ask the question, then then
we know. We just do this for ourselves.
We could just do this for ourselves. So yes, you can just drop us the comments and questions here. Yeah. Pastors will try to do their best.
Absolutely. Well, we have two questions kind of in the hopper that we can get started with. Lord bless us with wisdom. So the first one, it is a little lighter one. So we'll start with this. What are the best locations in Chicagoland to encounter God? Or, and here's they did big, both uppercase OR or. Do you have a place in Chicago and the surrounding areas that is a sacred place? John, I'll let you start. Well, you know what? You're probably going to need to start the next one because the next conversation is one we've had before, and I think you have a lot of really good thoughts on it. So I'm just going to steal this one right back.
Go do it.
I don't have a specific place in Chicagoland to connect with God. What I would encourage people to do is find somewhere that does bring you calm, somewhere that helps you to kind of become present, that you enjoy. For me, that's actually the beach, like the ocean. So I really like when I'm on vacation or other things, being able to sort of go to the beach, because I instantly feel a different level of peace and presence. So for me in Chicagoland, it's mostly on my yoga mat or in my office. And
Bill, that's because you've only lived down here. Do you know that we have essentially an ocean?
Yeah, the Lake
Chicago.
Michigan. Yeah, but you can only visit it for 2 months a year because otherwise it's too cold.
I resent that. I used to live next to the lake, and I'll tell you, I proposed to Jess on a very cold winter of the Oscars. I think it was in February. A very cold February evening on the beach.
Nice. That's legit.
So I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, it's true. And
the ocean.
The other time, the other thing I really like around Chicagoland, and for me, again, this is a little easier because I live out in the country a little ways, but just going out at night, we don't have a lot of light pollution. And so being able to sort of pray and just sort of be present with the stars, just looking up at the night sky, seeing just the immense universe of which I'm only seeing a tiny small portion, I think is a really helpful thing. But I think, I don't know that it's going to be the same place for everyone. I mean, it could be a coffee shop for you. It could be a specific building. It could be a park. It could be a room in your house. If you are by the city, I'm sure there's all kinds. I mean, an art museum. Like you could have a specific painting that you enjoy sitting in front of. There could be a sculpture. So I would just say any of those places, even in Orland, we have, there's a park and I don't know what the name of the lake is, but they have a bunch of benches and such out right by the lake. And I know I've gone and sat there before, and that's a pretty nice spot. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, prayer and connecting to God, I think for me, often the first step is getting present and getting the noise out of my head. And sometimes that actually means having something to listen to. So it doesn't necessarily mean literally cutting out physical noise, but it's knowing for you what helps get you in that place.
Yeah, no, this is all very good examples. I definitely can affirm your stars piece. Jess and I did a trip. This is not Chicagoland, so we're going a little bit outside of the scope of the question. I'll get to Chicagoland, but we went on a trip just to see stars before Matthew was born. That was the entire premise of the trip, and so we went to Mackinac City, which is by Mackinac Island, and Mackinac City has a dark sky park. And if you've never been to one of those, seeing the majesty of the heavens is really cool. My high school had a planetarium, so you could go out and you could see all the constellations and stuff, and like they could give you this. It was literally like a giant dome in one of our courtyards, a planetarium. So I learned about the stars there, but it's not the same at all. Our planetarium was not very good either, but I'll definitely say Starved. So for the one that I did research on this week, it's Starved Rock State Park. So when this question came in, I didn't have a really clear answer. And so Jess and I and our two sons went to Starved Rock yesterday because it was like super, super warm and it's my day off. So we went up to Starved Rock and we hiked around. There are some awesome hiking trails. And I really can't speak about that place highly enough. I mean, it was free. Not to say that free 99 is the best price for connecting with God. But definitely an awesome place to go and see the kind of the majesty of creation in that way. So I loved that. And then the one that I'm kind of, this is on my bucket list. Pastor's Appreciation Month was last month, so none of you guys can get me this until my birthday or something. But I really want to try, and Phil, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, a sensory deprivation tank. I know some Christians who have gone into sensory deprivation tanks and come out with like fully formed thoughts of God. I know atheists who have gone into sensory deprivation tanks and had experiences with the divine. So
is it just cutting off sound and sight?
No. So a separate sensory deprivation tank is have you ever seen Stranger Things, Phil?
Yes. Not the newest season.
But the first season.
Yes.
So what they put Ellen, what they put 11 in to make her go into the upside down. So it's like it's salted water that's exactly the weight of your body. It's like salted perfectly so that you'll float in place. And it's set to 98.6 degrees. So it's exactly the temperature of your body. Okay. And then you do put something over your eyes, and then you have like a mask on it where you can breathe. This is what I understand it to be. I think there's also like versions of this that are much less high tech, that are like essentially just like a tanning, like a retrofitted tanning bed that keeps you the right temperature. But the idea is that it cuts off all 5 of your senses.
Right.
Like, so you have no senses, and then you're kind of left there with your thoughts and with God. And I think I know that these places exist in major cities. So I know that there is one in Chicago at least. I think I've even Googled it in the past. So there's a sensory deprivation tank waiting for you, whoever it is who left that comment. Maybe that's the place in Chicagoland. If you can't get out to see the stars, you can't get to Starved Rock, it's too cold to go to the lake. Sensory deprivation tank.
That's interesting.
Just don't wind up in the upside down. That's not connecting with God. You've taken a left turn. You've taken a left turn if you see a Demogorgon.
Man, but man, if it could take you into a parallel universe, oh my goodness.
I mean, ultimately, the writers of the show, they were getting at something that like actually happens in these tanks for people. They're becoming much, much more popular. Like avocado toast is if avocado toast has taught us anything, things can become incredibly popular incredibly quickly.
This is very true.
Yeah. So sensory deprivation tank. This is my plug for the thing I haven't tried.
I like that. I think that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I do find that the less noise and stimulation there is, the better. But it's not impossible. But I think as much as we can create, I mean, obviously doing a deprivation tank is awesome, but more on like a regular basis, if you can create a space where you can be a little bit more present and cut some of those other things out. I mean, and that is part of, meditation, like breath meditation and such, is of allowing your thoughts to go. I mean, eventually you aren't engaging those things as much. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Hey, Bambi, don't worry about being late. There's no time like the present to join.
Hey,
yeah, definitely. Right. I can't speak about that either, to highly enough. Phil's 100% right on that. We talk about places like whatever, but the best place to connect with God is the place where you connect with God. So if that place is actually, Phil, this is funny. I believe my second ever sermon at Hope before I was the pastor there was I did a series, a 3-week series, November. So we're right about the right time now of 2017.
Okay.
And I did 3 weeks on encountering God. And one of them was about going into your tent, Moses.
Yeah.
I was a youngin' then in the ways of the preaching.
Well, and what St. Teresa of Avila talks about, the interior castle, and that's all inside. That's inside your own being, your own existence. This mansion or castle where God is discoverable, and we discover it by going internal. I mean, this is what's led some. I think you talked about centering prayer yesterday, right? Part of the understanding of Thomas Keating and others who sort of brought about centering prayer more recently is based on Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount to go into your inner room and shut the door and pray to your Father in secret, right? And we can think of people have actually built prayer closets and things, and that can be a very helpful practice, but they interpret the inner room as the inner room of your own being. So you don't have to go to a physical location necessarily to enter this inner room where you can encounter the divine. You just have to be, I think, intentional about creating that space. And it doesn't even have to be through the silence traditions. I've talked to a lot of very wise women lately, namely Sybil Macbeth and Christine Sign, who very much encounter God through physical practices of art and gardening. Tom Sign's wife, Christine, was talking about her spiritual practice of making pancakes with maple syrup, and how that's a spiritual discipline for her because of the connection to the maple trees and the season and the time. So she encounters God in pancakes. And I absolutely believe her because she is very many years ahead of me on this journey. So
I don't know. I feel like I encounter God in my wife's pancakes. Is that when my wife makes pancakes, they're divine. The cat's pajamas. Hey, you know what? We always have a pancake breakfast. You didn't get to experience it this year, Phil, because we always have a pancake breakfast at Easter.
Stupid COVID.
At Hope. So yeah. Speaking of COVID
ruins everything. Well, and do you want to do the COVID question, or Rick dropped a question as well?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Should we throw up Rick's question? Yeah, we can do the COVID question, or we can do Rick's question. Let's do Rick's question
because the other one we can either get to or save. How can the church incorporate restorative practices into its ministries? You should drop a link to Taya so she can come join us in this conversation. Rick, ask your wife. No, I'm just kidding. But his wife taught, Taya's taught, she's the one who kind of taught me about restorative practices and got me some resources that I read. And, restorative practices being especially the restorative circles of people coming together where we share and listen honestly. And it's even being done now in the justice system between someone who may have harmed someone else coming to a restorative practice of getting those people to hear and understand each other's stories and sort of being face to face. And it can take a lot of time. And there's a lot of elements to it that I don't even fully understand, but I think it's super helpful when people are willing to engage it. I think the church, this reminds me of the book of Philemon. And I don't know.
It's a deep cut, Phil. That's a deep cut. This reminds me of the book of Philemon. It's a deep cut.
Yeah.
I see your seminary showing.
Sorry. But no, I actually do, this is something that I came to later, actually, believe it or not. I don't feel like we studied the book of Philemon, really, surprisingly. There's some books I feel like were missed in my education. But what Paul is doing is, between Philemon and Onesimus, what he's saying is he links himself to both of them. And by linking himself to both of them, he then wants to link them to each other, through himself. So he becomes sort of like Jesus in the sense of saying, you're my brother and you're my brother. You owe me everything and you owe me everything. So in and through me, you are going to reconcile to each other. And I feel like a little bit the church, in some sense, could be the facilitator of the church must be the ones to enter into relationships with both parties. Both the one who may be the oppressor and the one who may be the oppressed, and say, if restoration is going to happen, there must be a party that loves both, I feel like, and opens that relationship to say, we're going to help mediate this, or we're going to help bring it together. If to sort of formulate that trust. So I feel like the church just has to be willing to go out and form relationships with everyone on both sides to bring them to the table. So I guess in that sense, without getting into all the ins and outs of restorative practices, I just think the number one step, the only way for churches to start it is I'm not going to finish that sentence. You can't do this if you're not connected to people, because you can't just invite them into this space. So the church must be people who are working with people who have been convicted or in prison, people who have come out of prison, people who are on the outcasts of society, people who are the normal people of society. We've got to reach out to all of them if we're going to sort of take that role, because if Paul didn't hang out with the slave owner and Paul didn't hang out with the slave, he couldn't have offered an invitation for them to come together. Right. That at least is step one.
Right. Well, and since you brought up Philemon, which was my first ever sermon at Hope Covenant Church.
Oh, really? Man,
yeah.
I'm just connecting to all of this history today.
You're restoring me to my place of hope at Hope. I am reminded in that book of how Paul just really he undoes a thing by redoing the thing. So he says, Onesimus, you have to return to Philemon, which actually is not in Onesimus's best interest. Stay on the run is the kind of idea, right? Let's not forget that the book of Philemon, while it might be new or kind of novel to many modern day evangelicals, to 1800s Christians in this country, especially in the South, the book of Philemon was regularly preached on, because it was used as a text to say, if you are a runaway slave, it's God's justice that you would return to your slave master.
Right.
Which is deeply problematic, but ultimately,
well, I think it's misunderstanding Paul's understanding of the situation.
Exactly.
Anyway.
So Paul actually is telling Onesimus, go back to undo slavery. He's saying that the whole premise of Philemon, the key line in Philemon is receive him again, not as a slave but as a brother. So Paul actually undoes the conflict between the parties by, like you said, joining them to himself and then joining them to one another. But he does so in the interest of, he actually does the opposite of what you would think, right? He says, come together, even though reconciliation and so frequently in situations like that is stay separated. So Paul really he undermines slavery to an extreme extent. Now, I don't think that that's the same as this transatlantic slave trade. Obviously, slavery is quite different. It's not benevolent, but it's also not quite as vicious in the same way. So, it's not apples to apples, but yeah, I think it is. I think it's an interesting point. And I think Philemon is a great one. I think that just connecting with people who are doing so. When you ask how does the church incorporate restorative practices, the first thing is that we have to lift up and promote restorative teachers and restorative theologians. So I have a person in our circles. Her name's Sherilyn. She might be listening, maybe. She often listens and then moderates the comments for us. But she is a pastor at another Covenant church in the area, and she could easily be a lead pastor kind of wherever she wanted to be. She's incredibly gifted, but she chooses to be part-time in her current capacity because it allows her to do all of this other restorative work, specifically with Stateville, which is the prison, the max incarceration facility in Joliet. So it could be easy for us to look over a person like Sherilyn, or Alicia Reese is another. She's full time, but she also does a lot of work with Stateville. Another person who's in our kind of cohort. These people are among us. They are within our midst, and all we have to do is engage with them. And so when they put on an event like they did last year of Watching Just Mercy, which is something that Sherilyn organized for her church, we have to attend. We can't just, blow those things off. We have to actually engage with those things. So lifting up the people who are already doing the work and not pretending like, hey, this is like some new thing that we can like, this is like the hipster thing to do, like have a restorative church, right? Like there are people who have been doing this work for a long time. So, yeah.
Man, I've been thinking lately, like if you're not talking about and looking for ways of justice, are we doing anything? I mean, it's just so central to Jesus. Like it is the thing, right? Like,
yeah. I can't. What do you want me to say, Phil? I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah, and as part of that, I think in terms of to go back to Paul or whatever, like Paul had to listen and know both of their stories, right? So I think we have to start by being good listeners as well, to incorporate it into our church, like you're saying, listening to restorative teachers, listening to people who think different or look different than we are. Like we just need to be intentional about listening to voices we're not used to listening to.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah. And also understanding that restorative teachers sometimes are not just going to be like pastors, right? They're also going to be like people who were incarcerated, right? Like the Central Park Five are like some of the most gifted restorative agents right now. And they are, doing gospel, and all we have to do is listen. I think that we need to remember that most of the Bible is written from prison. most of it. Because if you consider that the Old Testament, the majority of the Old Testament, depending on who you listen to, was written during the Babylonian captivity, which is my personal, that was how I would exegete the majority of the Old Testament, or criticize the majority of the Old Testament, that it's written during exile. Then really what you're left with is that it was most of the Bible, 2/3 of the Bible was written either in prison or in exile.
Well, and maybe you could even add this might up it. Also add occupation. So not just exile or little prison, but under foreign occupation.
100% under Roman oppression. Even more. Right. Well, I think that we often think that like, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, like these kind of even Joshua, these like huzzah, like we were the people in power, right? Like we think that those things were written while they were happening. They weren't. Yeah. They were written in retrospect. I mean, people were looking back on David and going like, "Hey, we missed this." It's like, Phil, here's my example for you, make you happy. It's like how people are going to look back on LeBron James in 10 years and be like, "How did we miss that this guy was so good? We just wrote this guy off that he was like the best player of the generation by far." I don't think he's the GOAT. I think he's the best basketball player of all time, but I don't think he's the GOAT because I think greatness is something that he is the greatest off the court basketball player of all time.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, but let's see if Anthony Davis stays and they win a few more championships.
Yo, the Brow is coming back to Chicago. I don't know why. I just have a feeling in my
maybe bones. When he's like, maybe, the Brow coming back to Chicago, and those for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, that's Anthony Davis, who's one of the best players in the NBA right now. Players from Europe come to play in the US in soccer at the end of their career. So like Cristiano Ronaldo will play in the United States at some point, but he's going to be like 48 years old.
Don't tell me that AD is going to do what D Wade did to us.
He's going to do D Wade. It's going to be the end of his career. And he's going to come back to Chicago.
I don't like you for saying that, even if it's true. You know that my friend from high school recruited Anthony Davis, right?
Nice. Yeah, you got to
Did I tell you this? Okay.
That's awesome.
Not for Stump the Pastors.
Well,
should we jump into our next
Yeah. So where is God during this pandemic, and what does he hope to accomplish through it? And as a follow-up potential, what is the church's role in what God wants? So John, we had a long, here's a plug for small groups. We had a great discussion about this or something similar in our Thursday night small group, like 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago. So if you're not in a small group, you missed an amazing conversation. So you should be in a small group. Just email John or myself. But John, This is the one I was going to let you go first on.
Yeah. So where is God during this pandemic, and what does he hope to accomplish through it? I think that when we ask that question, and I'm being very careful because I don't want somebody to take me out of context and create a little soundbite of me saying this and then post it on the internet. And then people will throw more bricks through my office window. I think that we have to look at this pandemic as ancient people would look at this pandemic, right? Like we often sit here and we exegete the Bible through historical critical method of hermeneutics of saying, okay, well, if I was in first century Palestine, what would I think about what Paul is saying here? Or what would I think about what Jesus is saying here? I think that what we don't ever do, and then the other, then we'll do like reader response criticism of hermeneutical method of saying like, okay, well, even if I wasn't for part of that group, what does it mean to me today? I think what we don't do is we don't look at today's circumstances from the eyes of first century Palestinian people. Right? Like we assume that like we can only look at our current environment from the eyes of like, okay, as 21st century Westerners. Mm-hmm. I think that if we were in first century Palestine and COVID hit first century Palestine,
he's going to go there.
They would be like, this is a biblical plague. They would be like, God is something through this. One of our kings is not acting right, or God is trying to overthrow the empire, or we are not behaving justly, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like if you go through the Bible, the things that we have experienced in 2020 where people are just like, today somebody mixed up my order at Chipotle and the woman next to me, they mixed it up. They put the wrong tag on them. So we both took our orders out. So they had to remake both of our orders. The woman next to me was like, well, let me do this for real. Cause she had a mask on. She was like 2020, right? Like, of course, like even Chipotle is getting it wrong. Cause it's 2020. Right.
Yeah.
So like the thing is though, all of the things that are happening in 2020 are like natural disasters. Mm-hmm. They're like the West Coast is on fire. The East Coast is underwater. It's November and it's 75 degrees outside. Oh yeah, and we have a global pandemic that is ravaging, probably would be millions upon millions of lives without modern medicine and technology. So like when you look at these things, you have to go like, okay, so what if I was in the first century and we didn't understand social distancing or hand washing, or we didn't have hand sanitizer or masks or whatever, and this was just destroying all of us, I would be like, God is causing this plague to teach us something. But as soon as we say, no, the plague isn't being caused by God, this is just a natural part of life, which, by the way, what is nature if not God? But this is just a natural part of life. Then what we're forced to say is like, oh, well, then what about all those plagues in the Bible? What about everything that happened in the Bible? Was that just also natural phenomenons occurring and then being written about by people who had to make meaning out of those natural phenomenon? And if that's the case, then we should be meaning making out of this as if God is causing the pandemic, whether or not you're comfortable with that idea. I think that that's the only way biblically to view it, unless you're going to deconstruct the entire scriptures and just say none of this happened and none of it was God ordained or allowed. And in that case, then we get to the question of where is God during the pandemic and what does he hope to accomplish with it? I think the total and complete wiping the slate clean of the injustices in our midst and the disconnection that we have forced upon ourselves. What are the good things that have happened as a result of the pandemic? I am not saying these things are worth the loss of life that it has caused. I'm saying that because the loss of life has happened, what are the good things? Number one, we are being forced to reckon with the fact that we have a profoundly broken healthcare system where people were choosing to go to work even though they were infected with various diseases, not necessarily just COVID, but just various diseases. We're completely changing our culture. Number two, we were spending more and more time away from our families on a regular basis. All of a sudden, we are thrust back into our households, spending way more time with our families. And everybody's like, oh, divorce is going to go through the roof. No, you know what happened? Actually, divorce went down because people actually connect with their spouses and then they don't have just like things rot and fester. Number three, we're seeing massive ecological changes, especially in China, where they shut down the entire country and like pods of dolphins are swimming new places off the coast of China where they haven't been seen in 50 years. The air is cleaner than it has been in like so many different places than it has been in 50 years. So like all of these things are happening that are positive. And then four, we're actually valuing connection. I mean, this is like, do you remember what Thanksgiving was like last year? People were complaining. They were like, oh, I got to go see my family. Oh, I got to go see my uncle. He's just going to talk about Trump the whole time. Or I'm going to go see my aunt. She's just going to talk about Hillary the whole time, right? Like that's all that they talk about. It's like, oh, it's going to be horrible. Now we're like, don't you tell me I can't see my family, right? Like we like actually value the things that we've lost. Yeah. So to me, that's what this, the massive inequality between the way that people of color have access to healthcare and people of majority culture have access to healthcare. I mean, we are seeing it play out in an undeniable fashion. So I think that those are the things. Like this COVID could teach us so much. So you want to know where God is in it? I think God's all in it. All in it. And if you can't see God in it, then I think that you have to seriously step back and look at the entirety of Scripture and say, do you believe any of this? Because I would say you don't, if you don't. So go, Phil.
Yeah. The thing, I love that reversal. So I'm stealing it now. Reading our times through the eyes of someone from biblical times. I think that's brilliant.
Thanks.
Yeah. Awesome. Second, at the end, you said something that really stood out to me. And this is the concerning part to me, is you said it could lead us to these things and teach us these things. It seems to have temporarily, but if you look at the Bible, what happens, right? it is always this cycle of they commit injustice, God punishes them with a plague or an invading army or killing someone or exile. Then the people repent and God forgives. And like the next day, they're back to all the things that got them in trouble in the first place. And, you know, for me, I think it's revealed, for example, why is the pandemic so bad in the US? The pandemic is so bad in the US because we're such an individualistic, capitalistic, unjust society.
Yes.
How many times we've seen people say, you just do you and I do me. If you're worried about COVID, you just stay home and we can all go out. We're not afraid of getting it. We'll all go out. Except that by keeping the numbers so bad and overwhelming our healthcare system and causing all these problems, you're causing systemic injustice that is affecting people. I met online the other day. I didn't actually meet them. I saw them speaking. They have no idea who I am. And it was a single mom who has 3 small children, whose husband walked away after they had their 3rd child. She was working 3 jobs pre-COVID, doing all she could to support this family, where her husband, who had been an officer in the military, probably made enough, you know, all that, whatever. All of the jobs she was let go from when COVID hit. She's still struggling to get back to work. This is not a woman who wants to sit at home. She wants to be working, but she can't get back to work. So when people say you just do you and I do me, you are responsible for that woman being out of work. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but you are, because by us not taking this thing seriously, it is revealing how much we do not care for one another, especially those who struggle, especially those who don't have a way out. And my great sadness of this is the pandemic seems to have brought that out, but it doesn't seem to be changing many people. No. They don't seem to see how their choices impact people, which, by the way, it then with the environment, our choices impact the environment, which impacts subsistence farmers in other parts of the world. It impacts animals. It impacts animals that are vital for our own food supply. So I think it's revealed these issues. And I think on some levels, we've realized the, like you said, wanting to be with our family again. And I think those are great things. But I think on other levels, we're sort of like Israel, where God sent the pandemic and there's prophets and people saying, we need to look at healthcare. We need to look at the environment. Look at how the environment got better. Look at the system that's so messed up. And rather than being like Nineveh, where the whole group said, we are putting on sackcloth and ashes and repenting.
But what happens to Nineveh after that, though?
Yeah, well, later on, right? They
exactly. They still do. They do the same thing over again too.
But my concern though is we're not even going to get that step. We're going to be more like Israel, where the prophets came and said, "You better fix it." The pandemic to me is a warning of what is to come. And if we don't repent, the pandemic is small in comparison to the issues that are coming down the line because we didn't listen to the warning. If the pandemic is a warning, this is a deadly, difficult warning. And I'm not sure we're listening.
Well, and I think that that's exactly, I think that that's exactly my point, right? Like, there are a lot of hellfire preachers out there. I'm just not one of them. I'm a very tough preacher on some issues, but I don't throw eternal damnation. I just am very confused. You asked that question, guys. That's a great one. If you've made it to 8:40 with us, 40 minutes into this thing, you've gotten a free question to ask us that'll make me squirm in my seat and probably run off the camera. But you know, I think that when you do look at those kind of preachers who preach like that, like Jesus, the thing that Jesus like really harped on was people putting themselves over and against others. So like all of the parables, like who are the people in the parables who like really get it, right? There's basically 3 parables where people get wrecked. I mean, there are other parables where people like don't do well. Like, oh, they're like weren't invited to like the banquet, right? But the 3 parables where Jesus really goes after people are the one where the guy's forgiven and then he doesn't return the favor. That guy is like owned. It's the rich man and Lazarus, which is one of the apparently 3 Lazaruses in the Bible, but this is one of them, is the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man really gets it in that one for not caring about Lazarus. And then the guys who beat up the vineyard owner's son and killed the vineyard owner's son, they like really get it. And what's the same about all of these stories? Every single one of them is about a person who understands goodness and chooses evil. And who they weren't set up for evil. I think there are people who are set up for evil. These people weren't set up for evil. They could choose goodness and they chose evil. And so when I hear people say like masks don't protect you, if you're wearing a mask, you're a sheep because it doesn't protect you. I often say, right, you're right. Masks don't protect me. They protect you. Like that's why I'm wearing a mask. And even if they don't, say like it's all hooey, right? And they actually don't work, which I think is ridiculous, and science proves that that's not true. But let's say for as a thought experiment on Stump the Pastor at 842 that they don't work, right? So they don't work. You made everyone more comfortable by wearing one. You put your comfort behind other people's comfort.
Which Jesus couldn't be clearer that his followers are this lowest of the low servants. So there's no question that if we are a follower of Jesus, we must be doing what is in service to others.
Meanwhile, you have government officials, the highest government officials in Orland Park, berating Starbucks employees because it's their constitutional right not to wear a mask. Like if that's just not a parable, like I just don't know what it is. What is, you know? Yeah. So where is God during the pandemic? I think God is right in the middle of the pandemic. And if you don't see God in the middle of the pandemic, then you probably have not read enough Bible to see that this is how God works all the time. And I think people rightfully in our small group kind of responded by saying, right, but isn't that pre-Jesus? And I think that, when people say that, I get it. I definitely had that kind of Christological understanding of like, oh, well, after Jesus, things were supposed to be different. I had that understanding, and I've recently really lost that understanding because God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And Jesus is just God exemplifying the lengths at which God will go to reconcile humanity to God's self.
Well, and look at Revelation. I mean, I don't see it as a one-time future prediction. I see it as a revealing of all times and places. But even with that said, in your words, the bad guys get wrecked in Revelation, right?
Right.
And by bad guys, I mean they very specifically call out economic injustice.
Mayhem too. Yeah.
I mean the bad guys, man. I mean it does, and by I mean maybe bad guys isn't the right word, but people who don't serve and love and forgive and act mercifully and with grace, it doesn't go well in that book either. And if that book is applicable in all times, not just a one-time future, it makes sense then that happens when we're not a part of it even today. So I think God may be inviting us to something, and where the church's role maybe is taking the first step to say, even if the world won't do it, we must do all we can to learn from this, what it means for the environment, what it means for justice, what it means to serve, what it means to say, it's not just about my preferences and what I want. Nothing in life is about just what I want.
Right? So Phil, what you're saying here in our final thoughts moment is that if the church can learn to employ restorative practices, perhaps there will be more places around the Chicagoland area where we could connect with God and nature.
I couldn't say it any better. I think we
tied that up in a neat bow.
Yeah, you did. There's nowhere to go from there.
Well, it's 8:45, everyone. You've wasted another 45 minutes with Phil and Jon on a Tuesday evening. But, I hope that our questions were helpful for all of you to listen to our musings. And please know that, we actually have an event every 2 weeks. It's on the other week that Stump the Pastor is. So if Stump the Pastor happens on Tuesday, it doesn't happen the next Thursday. But we have essentially a coffee hour, and coffee hour is it's not actually coffee hour. What's it called, Phil?
I think we just call it like Zoom Fellowship or Zoom Hangout.
Zoom Fellowship about the Bible as one church. But Zoom Hangout, coffee hour, whatever, happens at 7:30 p.m. Till about 8:45 on Thursday evenings.
Second and fourth Thursday, and you can join that whether you attend regularly at Hope or not, and literally just come. First and third. There you go. Sorry.
First and third Thursdays, and you can come and just hang out and just say like, "Hey, what's going on, guys? I want to actually debate these things with you, and we're there for it." So
awesome,
Phil. It's been a pleasure.
Always,
thank you for joining us, and thank all of you for sticking around for this.
Amen. See you guys in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.